All right, welcome everybody to Reuse in the Garden. I'm Dean Gunderson, the Director of Education here at Seed St. Louis, and we are going to get rolling. So first, just, I don't know, general thoughts. Gardeners in general are kind of the master of reusing and repurposing things. It's, I don't know, just seems to be in the nature of gardeners to just reuse stuff. Don't know exactly what it is, but I'm sure you all have good ideas as well. So again, if you have them, throw them in the chat or feel free to email me pictures, ideas. I got a lot of great ones from people because we had kind of put out the call, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, and I did get quite a few. So if you sent in a picture, you will probably see it in this presentation. So some of the like pros or kind of reasons why you might want to do it, reusing items, either items from the garden or items from somewhere else that you're using in the garden, can really help to reduce the cost of gardening, and also, you know, increase the sustainability of it. Reuse is always a good option. And then just kind of some broad categories that we'll touch on. One of the most important things, you know, kind of a form of reuse is to first maintain and fix the things you already have. You know, if you didn't take care of something so it breaks 10 times faster, that's not that, you know, it'd be better to just keep it going. So kind of maintaining, fixing, replacing things that are broken, so that you don't have to buy all new things is a form of reuse. And then buy consumable products, so things that you can't really reuse or don't really make sense to reuse in the garden, like seed starting mix. Try and buy those consumable products that are reuses of something else themselves, is a way to do that. And then reuse in the kind of classical sense, which is what we're going to spend 90% of this class talking about, is, you know, what things can you use for something else. So first, just some general thoughts on maintaining what you have. If you have tools, especially tools that move, things like pruners, loppers, things like that, but really any metal tool, it's good to oil them, which helps prevent rust and also helps keep, again, those tools that move, moving nice and smooth and reducing kind of wear and tear. So oiling those, also sharpening your tools, again, especially cutting things like pruners, can help them last longer, work better for you. But even things like shovels, which a lot of times we don't think of as sharp items, but when they're sharp, they work way better. So kind of sharpening those, hose, like weeding implements in the garden, sharpening can be really important. And one of the like basic ways to sharpen, and sharpening is a whole skill that I am not an expert at, but it's like a whole art skill. If you know somebody who's good at sharpening tools, you know, try and have them teach you as best as they can, because people that are good at it are really good at it. But files are kind of the main thing that you will be using to sharpen. There are like specific sharpening tools that you can get, but a file is really kind of a good all-purpose sharpening device for a lot of things. That's pretty cheap and accessible to most people. Also, you know, like if the handle of a tool breaks, like a wooden handle of a tool breaks, replace it if you can, instead of buying a whole new tool. Is better than just reusing the part that is left over. Some tools aren't designed so that they're easily replaceable, and what I say to that is don't buy those tools. It's not always that easy, I understand, but you know, if you can, you know, when you're purchasing a tool, trying to pick something that that you can easily replace the handle is a good option. If you have, you know, your wheelbarrow or your carts where the tires go flat, I know that our wheelbarrow tires always go flat, and so we try and replace them with flat-free tires, which cost a little bit more, but they're just so much less work, and you don't have to keep buying inner tubes all the time or like refilling them every year as they lose air. If your hoses start leaking, there's lots of ways to kind of patch them. You know, some people just put like tape on them, but there is like specific tools. Like if there's like a cut in your hose, you can literally like cut out the damaged part, and there's like splicing things that you can get for like $1 at the hardware store, where you like attach both of the ends together and then they fuse back together to make a hose. Or if like the end gets all roughed up, you can chop that off and you can get new ends to the hose instead of buying a whole new hose. is a really great way to do that. And then, yeah, like I was talking about, purchase easily fixable tools. If you've got, pruners and saws, things with blades, you can sharpen them, but eventually they just aren't really as good anymore. Like you can only kind of sharpen them so much, especially with certain tools. And so purchasing ones that have replaceable blades is nice. Generally, they tend to be more expensive. Like the really cheap ones usually don't have replaceable blades because the blades cost as much as the whole tool. But like if you're a serious gardener, getting a good pair of pruners that has a replaceable blade is well worth your money. And then, yeah, tools with handles that can easily either screw off and on, or just, there's a screw in them instead of them being like welded on or something like that, where if it breaks, you're just kind of out of luck. So that's kind of the first step to reuse. The second one that's really just kind of more about, like I said, like seed starting mix or potting mixes, would be buying things that are waste products themselves, is like a form of reuse. So in St. Louis, one of those best options is St. Louis Composting sells not a seed starting mix, they call it a potting mix for perennials. I think they call it like an herbaceous perennial mix or something like that. I think you have to buy it in like really big quantities, but it lasts forever. And it's based on bark, which is like pine bark. So the lumber industry, they strip off all the bark and then usually it just, I don't know, goes somewhere. Like it's just a waste product. The lumber industry doesn't want that bark. Well, if you grind it up, you can make mulch, and which is what most of it goes to now. But actually they screen the mulch, and all the little stuff that falls out makes a really good potting mix. And that would otherwise not really have any good use. So that's called pine fines. So even just buying pine fines from St. Louis Composting, you can kind of use as a seed starting mix. But as like a potting mix, they have this one that's like a blend of lots of stuff already. You can also use core or coir. People say it different ways. And that is, this picture over here is how it will often come. It kind of comes as like a brick, or is usually the cheapest way to get it is as a brick. And then you hydrate it and it puffs up and expands. So coir is the waste product from coconut processing. So it's all the like fuzzy husk of coconuts that again otherwise would just be a waste product that you can use as a seed starting mix. And it's a really good seed starting mix. It's also pretty good for potting mixes. They are even starting to make kind of pots and pellets out of it as a replacement for peat, which is not sustainable at all. Peat is terrible. But they can make coir pots and coir pellets that do the exact same thing as peat pots and pellets if you like that way of growing. And then rice hulls. Rice hulls are a little harder to find, but they are a good way to kind of fluff up a potting mix or add drainage to soil. So it's a replacement for perlite, which is kind of the white little bead things that almost look like styrofoam that you see in potting mix. So rice hulls are a replacement for that. And again, it's what's removed from rice to make it palatable and edible to us. It doesn't really burn. It doesn't really compost well. So like in major rice producing areas, it's considered like a disposal problem, versus if you can use it in your garden, that's great. And then kind of quickly, some like garden wastes. So just some thoughts that maybe you didn't think about. So things like wood chips, which you probably won't be having come directly out of your garden, but you can get them for free from tree trimmers oftentimes. Tree trimmers have to pay to go dump those wood chips. So if you get a hold of one and are like, hey, can you drop them off for free in my driveway? A lot of them will say yes, because then they don't have to pay to go dump it somewhere else. Ameren will also sometimes do that. They're a little harder to get a hold of, but if they're trimming some trees on your street, you could maybe talk to them and see if they'll drop off some wood chips for you. And those wood chips, are great as mulch. You don't need to go purchase mulch. You can just use the wood chips. And they're also really good, especially like those fresh wood chips that are coming from a tree trimmer are the best if you're wanting to grow wine cap mushrooms. You don't want like the wood chips that have been sitting around for a long time, because they can be inoculated by other fungus. So if you're wanting to grow wine caps, those like fresh wood chips are kind of the best option. Leaves are another thing that I'm always just baffled that people like put in bags and put on the side of the street, because they're like They're like gold if you're a gardener. They make, in my opinion, the best garden mulch. Like if you have a vegetable garden and you have leaves that you are like raking or bagging or doing something, they should be going on that vegetable garden, or composting them or something like that. But as a mulch, they're great. This is just a picture, of somebody mulching their bed to kind of winterize their garden. It's a great way, if you just want to suppress weeds in the over the winter and kind of improve your soil a little bit. Leaves are one of the best ways to do it because that's how forests are created. The leaves cover the soil in the winter. It's almost like that's their purpose. And it's really good in your garden as well, but it's also great mulch all year long. You don't need to just remove it in the spring and then leave bare soil. It's a great mulch between your plants all year long, but especially in the winter, it can be nice. And again, if you don't have leaves, often, if there's somebody down the street that does, they're probably not going to care if you take the leaves. I mean, you could ask them, but if they're putting them out to get thrown away. Weeds are another one that I also, again, you can compost. I usually just throw them down as mulch too. They're great. If it's like an aggressive weed with seeds on it, yeah, probably don't put that there. But most weeds, if you're staying on top of it and they don't have seeds all over them, just throw them on the ground, and all those nutrients they took out of the soil, they're going to put right back. Another one that I feel like is very hated by most people is those sweet gumballs, those spiky things. And I get why people don't like them, but I will say that they are great for filling the bottoms of large pots. Like if you've got one of those crazy big decorative pots and you're growing little tiny annuals in it, you don't need, 2 feet of soil in that giant pot. You could fill, the bottom half, the bottom 2/3 with sweet gumballs, and then put some soil on top and then plant your annuals in there, and it's going to save you a bunch of money on potting soil. It also makes the pot way lighter, which is nice. And they are also surprisingly good at erosion control. If you have an area that's kind of eroding, kind of like where you would think people would put gravel to kind of break up water and kind of protect the soil, sweet gumballs seem to do just about as good as gravel. And so, if you've got a little erosion gully or a little area that's kind of washing out, throw a bunch of sweet gumballs on there. And it really helps to stabilize that. And because they're spiky, they kind of lock in place and don't really wash away in the way that that more conventional mulches would. Some other kind of garden waste would be things like logs or stumps. I'd say if you have stumps, big old things that you have cut, they can make great seeding, especially I know school gardens like stumps, but they're just great seeding for anybody. You can also inoculate them with oyster mushrooms, and that includes a stump that is still in the ground. If you have what's left of a tree, you can inoculate that with oyster mushrooms, or just a big log. So this is a picture up here of some trees that my neighbor cut down, and I stole the trunks. I mean, I asked him, but took the trunks and inoculated them with oyster mushrooms. And I got these big old flushes of oyster mushrooms last fall, and they were delicious. If you have logs, smaller log, I mean, I guess you could do it with big ones too, but logs that you could move around reasonably. You can use them as borders of beds. So this is a picture that somebody sent in where they kind of, instead of metal edging or bricks or stuff like that, they lined up logs, which I think has a cool kind of organic look to it. You can also inoculate these smaller logs with oyster mushrooms as well. There's lots of other mushrooms you can inoculate with, but oysters seem to be the easiest. So you can inoculate those, and you can inoculate them and use them as borders too. You don't have to pick one or the other, and they actually seem to do really well, kind of laying on the ground for oysters specifically, because it helps keep the log moist. If you want to inoculate it and have it be a border, it needs to be a shade area. They don't want to be in full sun because they're going to dry out too fast. And then this one's kind of weird, but if you're doing mushrooms, especially on kind of the skinnier logs, there's a technique where you're drilling holes into the log and then packing a special sawdust kind of thing into it, and then it helps to seal that with a wax. So if you've got old crayons or old candles, the little bits that you can't really use, you can melt that and paint that over the hole as wax instead of buying wax specifically for that. All right, so now I kind of tried to organize the rest of it in terms of things that you would be doing in the garden, and then items that you could use for that. So talking about like, so I've got like a slide on like seeds, and then I've got one on like irrigation, and one on like seed starting, like things like that. So so some of it will kind of jump around, but that was the best way I could come up with organizing it. So seeds is what we're going to talk about first. And kind of the classic reuse would be save your own seeds. We have a whole class on that where we talk about how to do that. But I would say that many can be collected from plants that you would otherwise compost. So things like bolted plants, if your lettuce bolts, usually, we would just rip that out and compost it. Well, if you leave it for another week or two, it'll produce seeds, and then you can collect those seeds, and then you can plant your lettuce again. Or things that are overripe. So like if you get an okra pod that gets too big and it gets woody, if you just leave it there for a while, it'll eventually turn brown, split open, and then you've got okra seeds. You saved some seeds. Peas and beans are kind of the same way. If you get some that get too big or too tough, if you just leave them on there, eventually they'll turn brown, dry out, and then you've got seeds to plant for next year. You can also save seeds from things like things that you would harvest anyway. So things like peppers. When you cut the top, most people just kind of cut the top off. Well, the inside, there's all the seeds. If you collect those seeds, then you can dry them and plant them again next year. Or the insides of squash. So, usually we scoop out the inside of pumpkins and butternut squash and stuff like that. Well, those seeds are good. Like you could plant those. And tomatoes. Usually we don't scoop the insides of tomatoes out, but if you cut a tomato open and you kind of scoop out the seeds, you can then save those. And again, we have a whole class on kind of the specifics of doing that, but it doesn't need to be like you don't need to be like real super intentional about saving seeds. There's some that, are pretty easy to kind of get started on. And then you can also make your own envelopes. You need to store those seeds somehow. So you can make envelopes to do that out of scrap paper that you would otherwise recycle or throw away, which is what I usually do, because paper is usually a better way to store seeds. It helps to kind of regulate humidity a little bit. But you can also store them in use Ziploc bags as long as they're clean and dry, or just old, plastic or glass jars, containers, Tupperware. You can really kind of store them in whatever you want. For seed cleaning, so you sometimes will need to clean the seeds, like if there's lots of like other kind of debris and stuff in there. Generally, the best way to do that is with screens, various sizes, and there's special screens that you can buy if you get really into seed saving. But kind of the two sizes that are the most useful are kind of the window screen size and a hardware cloth, which you can probably find some window screen somewhere that is not being used. Hardware cloth, if you know anyone who builds stuff with hardware cloth, they have always got scraps laying around that you can use to make little screens. And then you could build the frame out of just some scrap wood, or later, I found where someone made them out of an old box fan, which I'll talk about later. Microgreens is another way that you can reuse things to make microgreens. So the tray, usually if you're going to grow microgreens, you need to have them in some sort of container that you can water and keep wet. But you can use really any used container. Anything that would hold water can be used to grow microgreens in. They sell like special trays for it, but you don't have to do that. If you've got any Tupperware sitting around, or old baking dishes or something that are not being used, or that you lost the lid of, those can be great little containers for this. This is a Corningware dish that I have that the lid broke and has just been floating around our kitchen for who knows how long, that I now use to grow microgreens in, and it works great to grow microgreens in. You can use like old pot saucers, like the things that you put under pots to catch the water, like those work great to grow those. Cake pans, cookie sheets, clam shells, so like those plastic things that like produce comes in, you can use. And then for growing media, so really kind of the only other thing you need to grow microgreens is something for them to grow in, like something for the roots to root onto. So generally, if you look online or you or finding somebody who's selling a kit, they're selling a media that you need to, continue to buy because, marketing, that's how they make money. But you can use almost anything. It's really shocking. So I've done it on like paper napkins. I've done it on paper towels. As you can see from this picture, I've done it on old cereal boxes. Like paperboard works really well for small seeded things. It doesn't work for like sunflowers or peas really well, but these are broccoli microgreens, and they were just fine sprouting into paperboard somehow. You can also use pine bark fines, which is that material that I talked about a little earlier, that you can also use as a seed starting mix. So you can use that, or you can use a sterilized used potting mix. So, if you've got kind of potting mix that you're throwing out for some reason, like if you grew your flowers in it and you're not using it anymore, you could use that, but you would need to sterilize it, which is a pain. You probably don't want to do that, but you can find instructions online of how to do that. And that would be a way to use potting mix that you're otherwise not using anymore. So then if you're wanting to grow seedlings, you will again need growing media. And that's, again, I'm going to point you back to the stuff in the earlier slides. Kind of the only thing I will say is not peat, if you can avoid it. Peat is by far the easiest product to find for growing seedlings in. It just is not very good at its job, and it's absolutely horrific for the environment, but it is what is most commonly available. But if you can find, those pine bark fines or coir or something like that, that's going to be a better, more sustainable option for you. You're also then going to need to have a tray. The pots that you're growing in need to sit on something so that when the water comes out of the bottom of the tray, it doesn't just like go all over, or the bottom of the pot, it doesn't just like go all over your table or your house or wherever the pots are sitting. And I'd say you can just use used trays. A lot of nurseries and stuff have got a lot of old trays sitting around. You can use old plates, like if you've got some dinner plates that you don't use anymore, like old style or got stain or something on them, you can use those. I really like dog kennel trays. So like these big black things that they stick in the bottom of like wire dog kennels are really great for growing seedlings on. And I mean, really anything that you would use for microgreens. Again, anything that'll hold water that you can kind of sit pots in works just fine as a tray. For lights, there are lots of really great grow lights out there, and you will get faster, kind of more robust growth with a light that is specifically designed for growing plants. But you can grow plants with any light. The lights that I have for my seedlings are not grow lights. I wish I had grow lights, but they're expensive, and I have other lights that work. So I don't have grow lights, and they work just fine. So you can use, again, really any light. In terms of bulbs, incandescents and halogens are not the best because they get hot, and they're not as intense. So they need to be pretty close to the plants, but because of the heat that they produce, they can kind of burn the plants. So generally fluorescents or LEDs are better kind of bulb options for you. But like any light fixture can potentially work. And old like shop lights, kind of those like fluorescent tube light fixtures, work really well, and is what most people are using kind of for home seedling growth. And then if you're growing more than, a few seedlings, you will probably need a shelf of some kind where you're having kind of multiple levels to grow things on. So somebody sent in this picture, which isn't of seedlings specifically, but was a shelf that I think they said was left over from a piece of furniture that they bought that they didn't use the shelf for, but it did work for holding their plants, which is great. Or if you've just got any other kind of old shelf sitting around, you can use that to grow your seedlings on. And then for containers, I've got a whole slide where I'm going to talk about all your different container options. But just a couple options for seedlings specifically is you could do soil blocks, which you can look into. There's you need to use a special soil to do that, but you can do soil blocks, excuse me, where you don't need pots at all. You just don't need containers. So that would be a way to not need to buy pots anymore, is because you just wouldn't need pots. You can also use those, again, clamshells, so those kind of plastic containers that produce comes in can work pretty well for seedlings. And then, sorry, the transcript is covering up my last example there. I can't see what it says. We'll never know. Plant labels. So I always emphasize that plant labels are super, super important. If you've gardened for, more than a minute, you have probably had a situation where you grew something and you were certain that you would remember it, because of course you will. And then a couple months go past and you don't remember. This is particularly a problem if you're growing, multiple varieties of the same crop, and you're like, oh, I'll be able to tell the difference between these 6 different bok choy that are all green and about the same size. Well, surprise, you won't. And so labeling is really important, especially when you're growing seedlings, because a lot of crops look very, very, very similar. Especially when they're young. So brassicas, like all of the brassicas, like cabbage, kale, collards, kohlrabi, cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, they're actually all the exact same species. So when they're small, they all look exactly the same because they are. And so you really want to label stuff. It's also really helpful to label stuff out in the garden as well. And there's a lot of, and you can buy labels for sure, but there's lots of other ways that you can label your plants. One that I think is cool that I have not done myself, but that I have always liked the idea of, is using spoons. Like if you go to like Goodwill or something and they've got, a whole bunch of old spoons laying around, you can do one of these. So I've seen where you can like etch into the metal, or you can stamp into the metal, or you can paint them with the names on them. There's probably a marker out there that you can also write on metal that works well. They make all sorts of different markers now, but writing on that is nice. It's not gonna rot or disappear or anything like some other options would. You can also use popsicle sticks. If you've got somebody who likes popsicles, you can save the popsicle sticks and use those. You can use corks. Like I've seen that where people will take a cork and then like stick it on a just on like a piece of wire or something, and then write with a marker on the cork. Blinds is one that I know a lot of people really like. Like if you find like old, vinyl kind of blinds, and you cut those into those little pieces, and you can write on them, and they hold up really well. Or metal blinds too, yeah, like the metal or the vinyl ones. You can also just cut up any plastic pot or container. I've seen people do it with like milk jugs, soda bottles, again, like old, black plastic pots, really any of those, kind of cutting those up, and again, writing on those with a marker will hold up pretty well. You can also cut up aluminum cans. If you kind of flatten those out and then cut them into strips, you can then, again, they probably make a marker that will write on metal, or you can etch with them. They make those like metal, I can't remember what they're called now, but it's like those, it's like an etching pen. It like almost kind of vibrates, and it will kind of like scratch into metal, and you can write on it. That works pretty like really well on aluminum, I know. And then potting soil. Just a word on potting soil. I know there's some people out there who will tell you, like, if you've got, like you're growing annual flowers or something outside, and you fill it up with potting soil, and then you plant your flowers into it, and then they think at the end of the season you need to throw all that potting soil away because it's no good anymore, and you need to get all new soil. That's not really true. Probably why people have done that is because potting soil for the most part, or potting mix for the most part, isn't soil. It's not, there's no actual soil in it. So there's no actual nutrition in it for the plants. And so they generally have a fertilizer in them, and that fertilizer is only going to last so long. And so then if you try to grow stuff in it the next year, that's not really going to grow as well because there's no more fertilizer in it. So you don't really need to buy all new soil. You need to buy some fertilizer. So generally speaking, unless there was like an awful disease or there was something like wrong with the potting mix, you can usually reuse it and just add a granular fertilizer to it, and it will be just fine. But if that does not work, or you do have something that was really diseased and you just want to get rid of it or something like that, add it to your garden, throw it out. it acts as a nice kind of fluffy soil amendment, or you can throw it into your compost and kind of add it into your garden that way. Like, don't just like throw it away, or in the yard waste or something. Like, it doesn't need to do that. You can reuse those things. And then containers. Really anything that will hold soil can work as a container. The limit is just if it will work for what you need. You know, if you're trying to grow a really big plant and you're like, I have this little tiny container, then yeah, that's not going to work. But it could work for a container for something really tiny. Or if it's like, oh, it's not like a really convenient thing. Well, if it's just like a decorative thing that you're doing, who cares? So just some examples or ideas. Just reuse old plant pots. Those like plants you buy from the nursery, the pot, reuse that pot. Old food or other containers, as long as they're safe. Like, I probably wouldn't use like raw meat containers or anything like that. But if you've got like a container that had peanuts in it or something, yeah, you can use that. Disposable cups, especially for like seedlings. I know sometimes people will do that. Old bottles with the top cut off, or like in this picture with the side cut off, you can use as containers. Gutters is one that I've seen. I don't love gutter gardens because they are really small. But again, if you're growing a really small plant, it can work. I know strawberries is the one that a lot of people like to grow in gutters. But if you've got some gutter scraps laying around, you can potentially use those as pots. Plastic totes or tubs. I don't know if you can see in this picture down here. It's kind of hard to see, but like this was like a big plastic basket thing that we just like poked some holes in the bottom, and we're growing some cucumbers in it. Fabric grocery bags, again, not a great one because they do degrade pretty quick, but you can grow stuff in those if you've got a bunch of extra sitting around. Baskets, any kind of basket. Milk crates, I think you can kind of see it in this picture too. We got another cucumber growing in this milk crate that we just kind of lined with some burlap or some weed fabric or something. Sinks, bathtubs, toilets. I've seen people, grow in all of these things before. Wheelbarrows, you've got a wheelbarrow that the bottom is rusted out on. Well, now it's got drainage. It's a great pot. Cooking pots, again, you'd want to poke or drill holes in the bottom. Strainers, I've seen people grow in. Rigid kiddie pools, so those like rigid like blue plastic kind of kiddie pools that they sell. Those can be used as just a normal container if you, again, drill or poke holes in the bottom. We really like it to grow water chestnuts, which likes to be flooded. So that works. It works really well for water chestnuts. You could probably also grow rice in it, but I have not done that. But water chestnuts really like it. Cardboard tubes, so like toilet paper tubes, paper towel tubes, wrapping paper tubes, you can make little pots out of for starting seedlings. You can't grow like a full-size tomato or anything, but you can kind of cut them and then kind of cut little slits up the side and kind of fold it up so there's a bottom, or you could just leave it open and just set it right on a tray and then fill it with a seed starting mix and grow seeds. I did that for a couple of years and it worked pretty well before I was able to find some old pots that I could reuse, that I didn't have to go buy a bunch of plastic pots. There's even little things. I have not done this, but I, again, have met people who have, where there's these little devices that you use to like make pots out of like newspaper or old paper. That works pretty well. I've even seen people plant things in chutes, which I always think looks kind of strange, but I've seen people, get like an old, like high top kind of work boot, and they'll like plant some perennial something in it. So again, really anything that is like a container, a vessel of some kind, you can grow stuff in. Or this picture up here, this was another picture that somebody sent into us of them growing little seedlings in eggshells in egg cartons. It's not going to work if you need the seedling to be big, but if you're growing something small, or you're just getting it started to then move up to a bigger pot, you can even use eggshells. So then raised beds. Often when people think of raised beds, they think wood, they think lumber. I need to build, a lumber box. And you can do that, but a raised bed is not like a, load bearing structure. I mean, I guess there's weight pushing out on it in soil, but, it's not holding up a house. It just needs to, if it can corral some soil, you can use it to build a raised bed. So, you can use lumber. You can use, old wood that you got laying around, as long as it's not old treated. Don't really recommend that. Or like old railroad ties, don't recommend that. But like if you just got some other kind of scrap wood laying around, use that. Or we had somebody send us a picture that I don't know if it made it into my presentation, that they built raised beds out of a tree that died in their backyard, and they like had somebody chop it up like into like big rough planks, and then they built their beds out of that. So you can't, wood is great. Like I said a little bit earlier, you can use, logs, stumps, and just kind of build a border and then fill it with soil. But you can also use bricks. You can use landscaping blocks. You can use cinder blocks. You can see kind of some bricks up here for a bed. You can see cinder blocks up here. You can use urbanite, which is just old concrete. If they like jackhammer up a bunch of concrete, you get those big kind of concrete pieces. I've seen people build beds out of that. Just rocks. You can just pile up some rocks. Ceramic tile. If you've got, you're pulling out an old floor or something, you got a bunch of ceramic tile, you can just kind of stand those up and then like pound rebar or something into the ground to hold it upright. Works pretty well. You can use wine bottles, which we built like a little wine bottle bed here where we stuck the wine bottles into the ground, and then we just kind of use string to kind of weave them together so that they didn't just like go all crazy over time, to kind of hold them in line with each other. And that bed was there for probably 5 or 6 years before we removed it, and it was still fine when we removed it, but we needed to remove it to make way for something else. You could use metal or tile roofing. So this is a picture that I took of a farm in Havana that was using old roofing tiles. So you can see kind of that like wavy kind of roofing tile, and they just stuck those in the ground and then pounded rebar in to hold it upright, and it worked really well. Logs. Oh, and then I meant to get a picture of this and I forgot. So like those big, those big fat old big screen TVs, if you take off the plastic back to them, there's some really good designs online for making wheelchair accessible beds with that. Like you stick that and then you build kind of a bed around it, and then the wheelchair can kind of, and the person's legs can kind of slide into that gap and then still have the bed right there. If you look up online, like wheelchair accessible bed, big screen TV, you'll see examples of that. I'm sorry, I wasn't able to get a picture on here. So for irrigation, irrigation is just getting water to your plants. So there's lots of ways to do that. There's one technique called Oya, which is designed by indigenous people all over the world, in dry parts of the world. But it's the idea of kind of burying a vessel that then you fill up with water, and it slowly leaches water out. So usually you do that and then you plant things right around it, so that you're not having to water like the whole area. You're just kind of watering right where the plants need them. So you can use just a plastic water bottle. So you can see where this is buried, and then kind of in the bottom of that, there was a couple holes poked. So then you take the lid off, fill it up with water, and then slowly over time the water is going to kind of leach out through those holes to keep the soil wet to water these things that are close to it. Looks like I didn't finish my thought here, but this is a buried clay pot. So if you get like terracotta pots that's got like a crack in it or is not good for some reason, you don't want to use it as a pot, you can bury that, and then the same thing, fill it with water. And then if you've ever used terracotta, you know that the water just kind of comes through the material. If you have a leaky garden hose and you don't want to patch it or don't need to patch it, you can just go whole hog on it and just poke a bunch of holes in it, and then kind of lay it around your plants, and then put mulch on top, and then it's going to act similarly to a soaker hose. When you turn the water on in that hose, it's going to come out of those little holes, and the mulch will help it from just spraying all over the place. Or you could let it spray all over the place, and it's then a sprinkler. If you have a soaker hose that doesn't work, I had a soaker hose that it just like did not really function like with the water pressure that I had, and so I was like, what the heck am I going to do with this? You can do it where you cut it into like small pieces, and then you cap the end, like you just like, I don't know, put a clip on it or like melt it or something so that the water doesn't come out this end, and then the other end you stick onto the cap of a water bottle, and then you can bury that. And it's kind of the same idea as an Oya, where then you would fill the bottle but it's going to go out and kind of slowly leach out of that little bit of soaker hose. If you have a leaky bucket, if you have a bucket that, got a crack in the bottom, or you had to drill a hole in it to get two buckets separated or something like that, that is a great way to water trees. So if you just stick that bucket kind of next to your tree and then you fill it up, it's then going to slowly leak out of that hole and slowly water your tree, so it has time to kind of soak in to the ground. I generally recommend to people, if you plant a new tree, that you want to be watering 5 gallons a week, about 5 to 10 gallons a week. And so if you've got, a leaky bucket, stick it there next to the tree, put a rock or something in the bottom so it doesn't blow away. And then, once a week or twice a week, if you need, 10 gallons, just go over there, fill up the bucket with the hose, and walk away. And then that bucket is going to slowly leak and water your tree for you. If you just have plastic bottles, you can poke holes in the top and use as a watering can, like a little watering can for inside, like in the cap, and then it'll just kind of hold upside down. It'll just kind of dribble out or pour out, depending on how big the holes are. You can make like an improvised sprinkler, so you can see where this person poked holes kind of all over it, and then they taped it to their hose and turned it on, and it'll act as a sprinkler for you. You can also you can do this with a plastic or a glass bottle. I like the glass ones better for this purpose. But if you fill them up with water and then you stick the end into the ground, oftentimes people will do this with containers, but you can also do it for plants that are in the ground, and you push that into the ground. It's going to slowly leak water into the soil, and will slowly water whatever plant you pushed that into the soil next to. Trellising is another one, kind of like containers, that you can kind of use anything in a lot of ways. Just a huge number of things can be used as trellising, because it's really just something that will stand up and let something grow up it. But some ideas are, if you have broken tool and broom handles, and hopefully you were able to repair the tool and just get a new handle, but that broken tool handle or broom handle can make a great trellis, especially just like as a stake, can be pretty good. If you have a patio umbrella that all the fabric has ripped or is not useful anymore, rip all the fabric off, but keep the frame, and it makes a really good bean teepee. If you have old ladders can work well to let stuff grow up them. I've seen people grow bed frames, like if you have a headboard, especially like those like old metal headboards that have got the posts on them. You kind of stick that in the ground. That can be a good trellis. Crib sides, so like the kind of gated side to cribs can be good trellises. You can also just use like branches or sticks from your yard a lot of times for smaller things. So things like peas that really don't get that big. They're not that heavy, but they need something to grow up. Just like sticks, branches can work well. Crutches can make good trellises. Drying racks, this is a picture that somebody sent in to us, of like an old foldable drying rack that they grew some cucumbers on, and they said it worked really well for them. Another one is if you have any of those light duty tomato trellises, which I feel like a lot of people buy when they're new to gardening and then immediately get rid of them. Those like little kind of cone shaped ones, I will say they are terrible for tomatoes, but they are really good for peppers, eggplants, tomatillos, and ground cherries. Because those plants all stay smaller and they can like mostly hold themselves up, but they do a little bit better if they get a little bit of support. So those skinny kind of light duty tomato cages actually work really well for those things. So if you're growing those and you bought some of those tomato trellises, instead of throwing them out, you can use them instead to help support your eggplants and your peppers. And then if you're growing things on trellises, a lot of the times you'll need to tie them to the trellis. So things like beans will kind of trellis themselves, but some things, if you're wanting to trellis a tomato, it's not going to just stick to something. Usually it needs to kind of be woven in or supported in some way. You can just use twist ties. If you get bread, save your twist ties, you can use those. You can also just use strips of old cloth. If you've got, an old t-shirt and you got too many rags, you can cut up the old shirt into strips and then use that to tie them on. And those cloth strips also work really well to support fruit. So like if you are trying to trellis a watermelon, the vine will grow up just fine, but if you get, a big watermelon hanging on it, it will oftentimes just fall off. So you can make like a hammock where you have a piece of fabric under the fruit and kind of lift it up, and then you tie the two ends of the fabric to whatever trellis to kind of take that strain off the vine, which is helpful. So you can do that. So then for cold protection, so one of the ways to protect plants from the cold, and this is generally a thing that you do more in the spring than in the fall, would be a cloche, which is where you just put a container over a small plant to help protect it from the cold, keep it a little warmer. It's like a super mini greenhouse. I've seen where people do milk jugs. So this is a picture that somebody sent in where they kind of cut the bottom off of the milk jug, and then you stick it over the top of the plant, and it will keep it warmer in there to protect them and get them growing a little earlier into the spring. You can also use kind of the glass lids of like cake stands or something. I know there's this one that I've seen so many people floating around. I think they sell it at Target or something, that it's like, an all glass cake stand, and there's like a dome type lid that works great as a cloche. For frost covers, so things that you would just like cover plants for when we have kind of these early frosts in the fall, where it'll freeze a night or two and then it'll be warm for another week, and so you're like, oh, I want to cover my plants, and then hopefully I'll get another week of growth. You can just use old sheets or old towels, old sleeping bags, just kind of any fabric-ish material will help to just cover those plants and keep them a little warmer. And then if you want to go, all in and build like a greenhouse or a cold frame, you can do that with old windows. You can do it with old shower doors, like glass or, translucent plastic shower doors, or old storm doors from, like the glass storm doors, and old lumber to kind of build the frame for cold frames or greenhouses. So this is a picture that, again, a gardener sent in to us of a greenhouse that they built, and you can see here it's built of just a bunch of old windows and some old lumber that they put together, and that's where they start their seedlings. And again, you can do the same thing for a cold frame, just using some old wood as the sides, an old window as the top, and you've got some nice season extension. For low tunnels, it's another way for season extension to get stuff started earlier in the spring, but also to keep stuff going later into the fall or even all winter long. You need hoops. You need to like build kind of the structure. Generally, people would do that out of PVC pipe that they purchase, or like a really stiff wire hoop. But you can do it, if you just have scrap thin PVC pipe, you could use that. Or you can use hula hoops. You can see here where somebody, cut a bunch of hula hoops in half and use that as their hoops. And if you got a bunch of hula hoops sitting around for some reason that you don't want, you can cut them up and build a low tunnel. And then for covering your low tunnel, you can use bubble wrap. You could use old sheet plastic. You could use old shower curtain liners, like those like clear vinyl, like shower curtain liners. I don't know what this is called, but I've seen, like, my sister just bought like this mattress online, and it came like rolled up, and when it like opened up, like it was wrapped in this like plastic material that looked almost exactly like row cover, which is another material that you would put over a low tunnel, and it's this huge sheet because it was for a mattress. So any that like thin kind of fabricy plastic material that you'll sometimes see on big items, just to like prevent scratching and stuff. Like you'll see on like wood furniture, I've seen it sometimes too, where they kind of wrap it in that, just so that the packaging as it's moving doesn't like scratch the wood. You can use, and then burlap bags, which is not going to keep things warmer, but can act as like a shade cloth over a low tunnel in the summer. Burlap is a pretty good material to do that. For pest control, if birds are an issue for you, some people will like hang up beach balls that they like paint like a big eye on, which looks really weird. But if you look online, you'll find where people sell them. I think they call them scare balloons. They're these they look like just big beach balls that look just like a giant eye that's supposed to make birds think that there's an owl or something. I don't know, but they do work a lot of times. Some people swear by like hanging up old CDs that like the reflectance as they kind of move kind of freaks out the birds. You can also use like cassette tape ribbon. If you pull out all the ribbon and the cassette tape and you kind of string it taut, when the wind hits it, it'll kind of make a noise that the birds don't like. You can also use, if you have like a hanging basket, kind of one of those like wire hanging basket frames, if you find one of those, or like an old wire trash can, if you just stick that upside down on top of a seedling, it helps keep deer or rabbits away from the plant, depending on how small the holes are of the wire. Plastic bottles can be used as well for diatomaceous earth, which if you've ever used, is like a really fine powder. And if you poke some holes into the lid, put the diatomaceous earth in the bottle, and then you just kind of squeeze the bottle, it'll kind of puff those clouds of diatomaceous earth out onto the plants and help cover them for you. Going back to kind of hardware cloth scraps, if anybody has hardware cloth scraps, if you wrap that around your tree trunks, it'll help deter voles, which can be a problem. Voles and rabbits, which can be problems, especially on fruit trees in the winter. They like to gnaw on the bark. And then window screen can be good to wrap around trees that have borer pests. So things like peach trees and apples that have insects that will literally bore into the trunk. If you wrap the trunk in insect or in window screening, they can't get to it because the holes are too small. For weed control, burlap bags work really well. You can get them from coffee roasters a lot of times. We'll just give you burlap bags if you ask for them. You can also just use like 100% cotton fabric. So again, if you've got like some old sheets that you don't want or some old shirts that you don't want or something, you can like lay those down. And again, as long as they're 100% cotton, like there's not like polyester or something, they can act as a weed barrier and will eventually decompose. Cardboard works really well as weed control. Old billboards is something that you can't really get for free anymore because people are finding how great they are. You usually have to buy them, but they do make really good weed suppression, like where you would lay it down to kill all the weeds that are there and then remove it to plant things. And just a note on that, I would say tarps usually do not work, just because usually they still let a fair amount of light through. But if you have a tarp that is like black and like opaque, like you hold it up to the sun and you're not seeing any light come through, then like old tarps could work as well. Carpet actually is another thing that I forgot to put on here. Carpet works really well to like smother, like if you've got old carpet, you lay it down, it'll kill whatever's there, and then you remove it and you can plant things. If you're wanting to collect rainwater, any watertight container, IBC totes, 55-gallon drums, kiddie pools, buckets, just like old totes. I mean, really anything. I've collected rainwater in an old trash can that's collecting from like a leak off of a gutter that the landlord hasn't fixed. And I've got like a kiddie pool that I sit under, like a downspout that just catches the water from the downspout. And I've got some buckets that I use. Like, I mean, you can use really anything you want. If you're into vermicomposting, you can make your own vermicomposter out of totes, tubs, buckets, even a chest freezer. I was not able to find my picture, but Grow Spanish Lake has a big vermicomposter that they built out of an old chest freezer where they like cut holes in the side for ventilation. And they've got like just a big old worm composter now from this old chest freezer. For the bedding for the worms, because you need to, like, you throw in lots of food scraps and stuff, but you also need to be adding bedding. I've seen where a lot of people like to buy coir to do that, or core, like the coconut product that I was saying was good for seed starting. And you can do that, but you can also use shredded paper, which, if you don't have a paper shredder, any office you go to is probably going to have a paper shredder, and you can get just shredded paper. Or if you have soiled paper products, like things that you cannot recycle, can make good bedding. If they've got grease on them or something like that, they can still make good bedding for your worms, and you can reuse those things that way. And then last but not least, just a couple of random ideas that didn't really fit into a category. One is umbrellas. I this year have fallen in love with using umbrellas in the garden, especially patio umbrellas, like the big old umbrellas. But even just like, normal rain umbrellas are great for staying cool in the garden. Most vegetable gardens are full sun because our vegetables like full sun, but it is hot out there, especially in the summer. And so if you've got a big old patio umbrella, you can just like lay it on the ground, like, this boat, just like lean it on the ground, kind of wherever you're going to be, and then just kind of sit in the shade of that as you're weeding or harvesting or whatever. And it is so much nicer than trying to do that in the full blaring sun. Also, and this is something I referenced a little earlier, but like for screening things, I also saw where some people will use old box fans. Like they'll take the one side off, they'll take out the whole like fan mechanism and just leave kind of the metal frame and then the grid on the other side. And you've got a screen right there for screening, either compost or for like rough seed cleaning or things like that. Or, if you need a finer screen, you can use that and then attach window screen over the kind of grid panel on the one side. And then you've got a finer screen as well. If you have an old step ladder, you can use it as a plant stand, like in this picture. And then buckets are just, buckets are great, very useful. And you can get them a lot of times for free from bakeries. Like if you go to like a grocery store that has a bakery, oftentimes they're getting in like literally buckets of icing or like buckets of frozen eggs or things like that. And a lot of times those buckets are just getting kind of thrown away. So, no guarantees, but if you go to kind of your local bakery and you ask, you might be able to just get some free buckets, which is nice. You can sometimes also get kind of those big like kitty litter buckets. If you go to like animal shelters, we'll sometimes just have a lot of those sitting around that you can get for free if you ask. And then metal banding, which is not something that you see very often anymore, but like lumber or like metal will sometimes come like banded, where it's like these like thick metal like straps that kind of hold them together. And if you can get those metal banding, there's plans online from, I believe it's the University of California, on how to make a stirrup hoe from that, which I did and works pretty well. So yeah, so those are the ideas that I had and the things that I've seen and what I had heard before for ideas for reuse. It looks like we got quite a few questions, which is great. So I will answer those. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. And